My name is Stella Lupushor, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our virtual conference, Digital Workplace, Navigating the New Work Normal. We live in an unprecedented times when we've developed a new vocabulary overnight. The words quarantine, social distancing, PPE, telemedicine, essential worker entered our language in a very short order. We have new ways of working, remote working, flexible schedule, Zoom calls like this one, and of course, interruptions from our family members and pets. At the macro level, organizations are grappling with the new reality of this crisis and are starting to think how to adapt internal practices, processes, technologies, so the workforce can lead, learn, and operate in these distributed and digital ways. We now have a great opportunity to shape this new normal and ensure the human is still at the center of this digital reality. We're welcoming you to this conference to tap into our collective knowledge and start shaping our point of view on what this new normal might look like and how technology can enable it. More importantly is the responsibility we have as HR professionals, leaders, technologists, designers to create a better workplace for everyone. Today, it'll be a series of 45-minute long sessions with 15-minute breaks in between, where we will unpack all of the topics that are helping us shape this new point of view. Please continue the conversation in the chat, ask questions. I'll be monitoring that. And during the breaks, we'll also ask you to reflect on what you've learned during the panels. My first panel is an important setting the stage, and we want to start with more of a macro view of what the public health situation is and how we need to think more thoughtfully. We need to be more thoughtful about the vulnerable communities. We need to understand what the economy and the market and the labor markets are going to look like over the next quarters, and how we now more than ever need to rethink the talent redeployment across industries and across organizations as the unemployment shifted from record low to record high in a matter of weeks. So I'd like to welcome our first panelists, Dr. Kelly Tremblay, Professor of Neuroscience and Audiology and co-author of World Health Organization Guidelines for Integrated Care for Older People. Levanon, our own conference board chief labor market economist, and Michael Bazigos, the managing director of Accenture strategy. I'd like to welcome you to introduce yourself, your organization, the role you play, and one positive that you've discovered as a result of moving to this remote work reality. Dr. Kelly?
Thanks, Stella. Thanks. I'm pleased to be part of this group and this conversation. So as Stella said, I am a professor and I'm also an academic, but I'm also a contributor to various nonprofits, organizations that create policy for the aging world, both in the health perspective, but overall quality of life. And I'm the founder of Lendinier Consulting, and the way that allows me to work with individuals and communities and corporations to help create age-friendly spaces, and again, aimed at improving people's quality of life. Stella, do you want me to stop there? Or do you want me to go right into what we were going to?
We'll introduce all the other panelists, but if there is one thing, positive things that you've discovered now that you work remotely.
The positive thing is that I think in some ways COVID-19 has made my job easier, and I think it has the potential to make your jobs easier in some ways too.
Completely agree. Gad?
Hi everyone, thank you for having me here. I'm leading the Labor Market Institute at the conference board, and I'm going to share some of the insights about the future labor market. One of the benefits of working from home is that I get to have lunch with my wife and daughters and spend more time with my dog. But I also actually found that I'm much more productive than I thought I would be, so that's good.
Michael?
Hi, everybody. Michael Bazigos, New York City. I'm a managing director at Accenture with global responsibility for all things to do with people and organizational analytics. And one of the great things about this, and I think I'll be talking about it a little bit later, is how the opportunity to work with my Accenture colleagues on a compassion project having to do specifically with COVID and getting people connected to work at scale.
So looking forward to hearing more about that initiative. So let's start with you, Kelly. You have a point of view that is broader than just labor markets. It's more from public health perspective, from looking at the care that is needed, looking at vulnerable communities and particularly aging population. How do you define this new normal, and what are the things that we need to consider in the workplace?
Yeah, I see it through the lens of multiple perspectives, that as a clinician, as a provider for some of these, the populations that are most vulnerable, thinking about our aging population, as well as an advocate. So when I say that this has made my job a little easier, what I'm trying to do, and I think what you were trying to set the scene for today, is to find some positivity in these difficult times, because clearly COVID-19 is a global crisis. But maybe we can use this session and the rest of the theme of the day to how we can turn this into an opportunity. So when I say that it's making my job easier, it's because I'm coming from my opinions are shaped by the fact that I work in the accessibility and inclusion space. And so I work with individuals and companies like you to create accessible workplaces for people who are often excluded because they have communication-related disabilities. But I'm also here, or the hat that I wear is also, as you mentioned, as a subject matter expert in health and aging. And when we develop public health policies and recommendations, it's not only to keep people with accessibility issues and disabilities included, we're trying to create a culture that is inclusive of all, because we know that the benefits that come to a corporate environment when you have diversity in opinions and experiences can create a better products, better productivity, better ideas moving forward. And so if we think about the population that has been hit hardest by COVID-19, our aging population, we often think of it as people who are different than us because they're older than us. Or when we think about people with accessibility and disabilities, we think of them being separate from us if that's not how we feel. But I think it's fair to assume, and I think this is an opportunity to reflect on the fact that all of us, just like COVID-19, none of us are exempt from aging. And as we grow old, we'll find ourselves with some disability sooner or later. And so these two worlds overlap greatly for me, especially because to accomplish the goals that I've just described to you about, we rely heavily on technology and adaptive environments to keep ourselves connected. So my job usually, understandably at times, is it feels like I'm twisting arms at times to get people to recognize how organization can adapt and change how we work and live, to see how technology can be our friend, even though sometimes it feels like a foe, to keep us connected and productive moving forward in this aging workspace. So COVID-19, for better and for worse, has forced the hands of all of us to adapt quickly. It's changed how we live and work overnight. And it's an equalizer in some ways, because in some ways it's given us all a feeling of what it's like to be disconnected and even isolated. And it puts up barriers to us being productive, which is not unlike what we find in an aging workforce environment or with populations who identify as having, accessibility and inclusion needs. But spinning this in a positive way, I think it's also given us a chance to see what leadership can look like and the leadership challenges that lie ahead. So if we look at how we've had to adjust COVID-19 in what our new normal looks like, it gives us an opportunity to pause, reflect, and think about how we may be able to use these adjustments moving forward that may make all of our jobs easier in the future. So let's just, for example, give a list of things and ways that we've had to adjust from the employer section. We've had to adjust to employees working from home. We've had to allow, in many cases, flexible schedules or even modify duties because of some of the restrictions or constraints that come with working from home. We've had to train people up quickly on the use of technology, which we acknowledge is not easy. And even further, have had to find accommodations for people who may have special needs in order to communicate using this technology or just use technology in general. And for many people, this may trigger some of the points or the pain points of some of our older workers who may not have been as comfortable with technology. So with this, we may have had to find ourselves become more impatient. We've had to, it may even have triggered bias within ourselves that we may not have recognized because we are working under stressful situations. So as you mentioned, Stella, I think it's a time where we've had to find some compassion and some patience, recognizing that people, in addition to trying to do their job, are likely contending with family issues and health crises. Some of our employers may have health-related issues on their own. So we've been thrust into this situation. So there's not necessarily a need for me to paint this picture or to force ourselves to hypothetically think of ourselves in these positions, because we're all in this position. And so I want to spend just the last 5 minutes talking about how we can make lemonade out of these lemons. And my suggestion is to hold on to these feelings that we're experiencing and these learned experiences and these new skill sets, because there are skills that will help us prepare us for the next global challenge. And that is, this is where my hat comes in, is the aging workforce. Because that list that I just rattled off of things that we've had to do, that we've been forced to do, could have been cut and pasted from the SHROOM, the Society for Hearing, for HR Executive Roundtable summary on the aging workforce. It's not like this is not known that this is coming, but how we approach this is something that is not necessarily openly discussed in the workplace. And the simple fact is that we're all going to live longer. For many of us, it's about 10, sometimes 20 years old. So like COVID-19, there's no selective, there's no escaping this. We're all vulnerable. Whether you're a CEO or a line worker, we're not exempt from aging. And if we're going to live longer, we're going to need to earn longer to support ourselves. And we're likely going to need to learn longer to be able to remain employed. So not to assume that this audience isn't familiar with what I'm calling the age wave, or what we call the age wave or longevity. I've prepared a few slides to provide perspective. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to have you let me know if you can, once you can see these slides. There are just a few of them. But I'm going to give you an example of how the healthcare industry has approached this. Because when we speak about aging and health, we're really speaking about quality of life and what it takes to have a good quality of life. This document is a public record. People can access it on the web. And this problem of population aging is both a gift and potentially a problem if we don't manage it. So if we think about it in a pre-COVID space, this is the language that's used when we speak to any type of corporation, industry, healthcare sector, all aspects of sectors that are involved with human life. So from the World Health Organization, we know statistically that the world's population older than 60 years of age is going to double very quickly by 2050, but we see this growth more rapidly in some countries, quicker than others. The impact of this can be felt when we look at what the United Nations calls us. It calls us the most significant social transformation of the 21st century, because it's going to affect nearly every sector of society. Labor, financial markets, goods and services, as we'll hear later on today, health and housing, family structures, and intergenerational ties. So whether you're a consumer of goods, a producer of goods, whether you're creating the next generation of goods, or you're creating the next work environment where intergenerational communication needs to happen, we're all going to be affected by this. And we're all going to be looking to remain employed longer as well, so we're not exempt from this. From a healthcare model, we use a lifespan model that looks like this. If you look at the red line, it's just the acknowledgement that physically, in terms of biological years, there are some aspects of us that decline. So whether it's our hearing, our sight, our mobility, there's no escaping some of that physical decline that we'll inevitably experience. I should say, as a neuroscientist, crystallized intelligence and many of the skills, the things that contribute to our problem-solving abilities in our historical context actually peak in our 70s. So it's not all downhill. But from a public health perspective, we want to try and identify ways that we can intervene early and what we can put in place, either from healthcare or the environments that we exist within, so that we can try to maintain our functional ability and try to prevent that decline as early as possible. And for some people, preserving that functional ability may be continuing to run marathons into our 70s and 80s. For others, it may be to stay at the peak of our game as a CEO. It may be, in some ways, it doesn't matter if you're 50 or 70. If you can run that marathon, or if you can close that deal, if you're functioning at the level you want to, nobody looks at how old you are. It's just that you are able to maintain and achieve that goal. So we look at how many aspects, how we can fill that gap or prevent that decline. And technology has been used either as an opportunity or as a barrier. So let me show you how the healthcare has responded to this demand and the rapid demand. I'm going to show you what's called a tech map. The reference is on the bottom. You can see it's you can find it on the gerontologist.com. And the reason I show you this is not that you can see every company here. My point is that there's been an explosion of products, services. Many of them are tech dependent and rely on a digital world for us to relay this. So whether it's the finance sector, whether it's the transportation sector, whether it's in health insurance, home care, the healthcare industry has responded in a way that has used technology as an opportunity and created industries around it. And so I just want to segue here to ask if this is how the health sector has responded. I hope over the session today we can ask ourselves, how is the corporate sector responding to this age wave? And what have we learned from COVID-19 that we may be able to carry us forward to prepare for this age wave? And get maybe a little bold and ask ourselves, how prepared are we for this next challenge? To set the scene, we might think of this in terms of the labor force, and we'll hear more about that from Gad soon, but this is just one example of living, learning, and the need to earn for longer. It may seem counterintuitive, but the population of over 55 is actually the largest, represents the largest annual growth rate in labor force. These are figures that are projected from 2014 to through 2024 that were published in 2017. If you look at it, you're going to see that just in the 55 to 64-year-old rate, we're going to see an increase by 0.6%, and that grows significantly for those people over 64 to 75. That doesn't mean that suddenly people are entering the labor market that didn't previously have jobs, but it means that people are working longer. They're choosing not to retire, for many reasons being that they need to earn longer. It's not necessarily an option for them. Or it may be that our position, our employment is part of our identity. It brings us purpose in life, and we have the opportunity and the luxury to work longer if we choose to. So with these statistics and the idea that we're living longer, it may seem counterintuitive to COVID-19 and thinking, well, this is all going to change post-COVID because the aging population is our vulnerable population. Perhaps this age wave is not going to happen. And I guess I'm here to say post-COVID, the statistics and the percentage of people who are vulnerable to this disease may affect the older old. But this population aging over the boomers and the young boomers and the Gen Xers is not going to change. If anything, I think it's going to amplify the problem because we're now dealing with the additional impact of jobs lost and a labor force that has lost significant contributions to the retirement savings. Depending on how old you are, you may have enough time to recover from this, but a lot of people will not. So I'll just end this by saying, again, I hope the talks that we hear that follow, we can add this lens of this aging population to this discussion. And as people share information, we can use it to prepare for what this aging workforce, the dilemmas it poses. Because when I speak with HR leaders and when I look at the Shroom documents, it's clear that the corporate world is not prepared to on how to anticipate and how to manage this. We certainly have some barriers that we have to deal with in terms of ageism and technology. And I think COVID-19 has maybe already raised some of this awareness. And if the training that we've done in technology to keep our workforce active, I think if we can keep this going, it's an opportunity to use this and carry this over to prepare for the next challenge. And so my challenge to you today and to all of us is to prepare and use COVID-19 as a model for preparing for aging and seeing aging as the new accessibility inclusion, and to look at what's working, the positivity thing, the positive aspects of what we've experienced as COVID-19. As someone, as an employee who may be feeling and being placed and faced with an accessibility and inclusion challenge, once things return to new normal, whatever that might look like, I think it will help us to retain these feelings and to retain what's worked as a model for the aging population as we move forward. So I'll end there and turn it over to you, Stella, and the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tremblay. And what a wonderful message. The words I've highlighted is equalizer, accelerant, inclusion, flexibility, accommodation, compassion, ageism, and I love the live, earn, and learn string of activities. So you touched upon the impact on the labor markets, and I would love to bring our expert, Levanon, to give us a little bit more context around what's happening and what we can expect over the next few months.
Sure, thanks, Stella. I am trying to share my screen. Hold on. Can you see my slides? Yeah, good. So I'll try to briefly summarize what are the main impacts that COVID-19 is having on the economy and the labor market and will continue to have. So let's start with the bad news. Actually, most of it is bad news, unfortunately, but we're now in the deepest recession since the Great Recession. It's a deeper one even than the Great Recession that we had in 08-09. And what makes this recession special, every recession is special, but this one is especially special, is that it is very much impacted by many industries that are affected by social distancing, which is something we never had before. And this will already has a huge impact, but I think perhaps more important than the numbers that we are seeing in March and April and May is what will happen in the next year or two, because it's obvious that when people are not allowed to go to work and a lot of businesses are shut down, that the unemployment rate will be high. And the question is what will happen to the economy when the things open up and restrictions are lifted. And in that context, there was a question I think I saw here before, how companies should react to if governments open the state. And I think what will happen there is that it will be almost inhumane to ask people that are at high risk from COVID to come to work, especially when they can do their work more or less in a similar level from home. And I also think it will be difficult for employers to start saying who's at high risk and who's at low risk. So my guess is that many employers will be pretty flexible in the next year or two until there is full vaccination and the risk of contagion or death is much lower than it is now. So economic activity will depend partly on what governments decides to shut down and open, but it also depends on consumer fear. So as until full vaccination, a lot of consumption activities have a risk of contagion. So I think the ones that there are higher risk of being infected, and also the ones that are more discretionary, those are the ones that will be slow to come back to normal. So think cruises, amusement parks, flights, theater, everything that has a high risk of getting infected, and things that one could relatively easily avoid for a year or two. This could be a year or two because I think there will be some fear left in the economy until full vaccination. But beyond the industries that are most affected by social distancing, we have a deep recession and kind of second round effects. We will see many industries that are sensitive to recessions also suffer, especially cyclical industries like manufacturing and constructions, but also, for example, everything related to advertising typically drops a lot during a recession. So there will be many industries that are not as impacted by social distancing, but will suffer simply because we are at a deep recession. But there are a lot of industries that are less sensitive to recession or recession proof, and there are also industries that will actually benefit from social distancing, that to provide alternatives to the activities that are being constrained by social distancing. All in all, we think that in April, May, the unemployment rate could reach 15 to 20%. Just to give you a sense, in the peak of the Great Recession, we were at 10%. So we are already past this, and they are very likely to remain in double digits through the rest of 2020. In Europe, we think that it will be the impact will be more reflected in reducing hours worked per employee, but the rise in unemployment will be smaller. So they will share the suffering among more workers rather than have many people being laid off and a few people, and also many people being not impacted. Trying to go to the next slide here. I'm not sure. Oh, here. Okay. So what are the characteristics, the characteristics of the job loser? So they are not, the average person who would lose their job in these conditions is not the average US worker. They are much more concentrated in manual services like food services, building and grounds cleaning and maintenance in hotels and such places, personal care and service occupations. On average, they are much less educated. They earn much less than the average worker. They are much younger. They are more likely to work part-time. They are more likely to be women. and they are more likely to be Black and Hispanic workers, especially Hispanic women, are very much concentrated in those occupations that are likely to suffer the most. And that means that some of the trends that we've seen in recent years of a very tight labor market for especially the blue collar and manual services workers are now reversing, and those people without a BA degree, they are going to see much more job losses and a much larger increase in the unemployment rate. So what are some of the labor market implications? So we're going to have the opposite of labor shortages. In recent years, those who know me know that the word labor shortages appeared in every second sentence I uttered, and now we're going to have the opposite. It will be easy to recruit and retain. Wage growth is likely to slow down, especially for less educated workers and especially in manual services occupations. Labor force participation will drop again. We have seen a significant rise in labor force participation in recent years, but now it will certainly drop again. Wage inequality up to February was on a rising trend, on a declining trend. That's because the people at the lower end of the wage distribution, they saw stronger gains, but now that is likely to reverse, and we're likely to see an increase in wage inequality again. We're likely to see a slowdown in immigration, and even if the government does not intervene, simply there are fewer jobs that immigrants typically have in the US, so we'll probably see a slowdown in that. This labor market also poses or gives a lot of opportunities to employers that are less impacted by the crisis, but still operate in the same labor market that other companies play in, and they can use this to upskill and hire less expensive workers the same way they did right after the Great Recession. And another trend that I devoted in another slide to it is the huge increase in teleworking, and some of it may be permanent. So most office workers are now teleworking in the US, and the share, as I argued before, we think it will remain very elevated as long as the contagion risk remains high. But even after full vaccination, let's say 2-3 years from now, we think that kind of the habit of working from home will stick for many companies and many workers, and we will see shares of teleworking remain well above pre-COVID era. In some types of jobs more than others. So of course, most of it is in white-collar office workers, computer-related jobs, tech, especially seen a large increase in recent years in their share working from home. So in some types of jobs, we're going to see more about more of that. And I think the rise of teleworking will have important implications for cities and kind of the economic geography. So simply because of the fact that so many people are working from home, this will reduce the number of people who spend their weekdays in city centers where the big office buildings are and many employers operate. And that could have major economic implications. So first, if we don't work in the city center, then we're not going to eat lunch there. So there'll probably be a large drop in spending on food services, but also other services like retail, because those of us or those people who are not living in city centers and just come to work there, they often spend money on other things, not just food, but retail, banking, entertainment, that they will stop spending on if they no longer come to the city center. That will also cause a drop in the demand for office space. If fewer people are in the office, you don't need as much office space. And potentially it could reduce demand for housing in city centers. If you think many Americans or other people as well, at some point in their lives, they have to decide, are we gonna live close to city center, have a shorter commute and a smaller home, or live further away from city center, have a longer commute and a smaller and a larger home. And I think the rise of teleworking changes the equation a little, because if you don't need to commute to work anymore, one of the main reasons to live next to the city center, not the only reason, but one of the main reasons is no longer a factor, because you don't need to commute to work anymore. Also, if you work from home, you probably want a larger space to work. I am fighting with the rest of my family members for office space, and I ended up in the living room, and all kinds of teenagers and animals are walking around me all day. So I definitely, if I know that this is going to be the situation for permanently, I may consider having my own office at home or something like this. So, and that if there will be a shift in demand for housing, we may see a downward pressure on real estate prices in city centers. But at the same time, there will be a larger demand for retail, food services, and other services, and perhaps even housing outside of city centers. And at the moment, they may not have the capacity to entertain all of those demands, and we may see a large buildup of this capacity outside of city centers. So that's an important trend to consider. I'll finish just because I think it's very important to recognize that the impact that we will see from COVID-19 is not going to be similar in every location. It will, in fact, we think there will be a large variation across cities and states. So, for example, how much they rely on the most impacted industry. So think Las Vegas, Orlando, that rely on like usually those are areas, Las Vegas, the casinos, Orlando, Disney World, there are a lot of proximity there in people. You need a flight to get there. So those areas will suffer a lot from that. Also, because of the large drop in oil prices, the areas that rely on oil production and mining, so Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Wyoming, for example, they will be more impacted. I think also areas where there's now a lot of spreading of COVID, it will be harder to contain moving forward, because they are starting from a worse starting point. So New York City above all else, but a lot of other northeastern cities, New Orleans, Michigan, those are areas that probably it will be harder for them to go to normal, because there is so much spreading of COVID in those areas. It will also depend on how difficult it would be to contain the spread, and then depends on population density, the reliance on public transportation, maybe the weather. I'm still hopeful that warmer and more humid weather will slow down the spreading. And if you look at the southern hemisphere, where it was summer in recent months, there is some reason to hope, because there's much less spreading there. But in general, New York City, the most densely populated and also the metro area that relies the most on public transportation and the crowded subways in particular, that will be probably more difficult there to contain the spread than in rural or small city areas. And finally, the share of older population. So we know that older people are more impacted by COVID, and they are probably going to experience more extreme and longer social distancing, and that could impact their spending. So areas with a lot of older population, like Florida or Arizona, could see a larger drop in consumption there. So this is, in short, my thoughts on what COVID means for the economy and the labor market.
Thank you so much. I think when you come to speak to some of the councils, you somewhat of a bearer of bad news, although in those cases were about the labor shortages and the tightness of availability of talent. And now we are flipping completely 180 degrees and still bad news, but we have some great news that Michael is going to share next with us, because there is a silver lining on a lot of these issues, and it brings a lot of creativity from the leaders and from HR organizations. And Michael, can't wait to hear the compassion project that you were describing earlier.
Thanks, Stella. I'm just working the technology, and we'll be ready to speak about what it is in a second or two. But to begin talking about this, so I mentioned earlier that I'm extremely gratified to be able to be a part of something that Accenture is doing for free, no charge. That's perhaps an unnatural act for a consultancy or services organization whose entire business model is based on charging for services. But we saw an opportunity to help people, help our clients, and ultimately help the world deal with the displacement that is going on right now with jobs. So I don't know, am I projecting? Can somebody confirm whether I am projecting or not?
Not the PowerPoint. Now you're projecting.
Okay, great. So we saw what I'm about to talk about has the title People Plus Work Connect. While I'm talking, if you want to sort of jump ahead, all you need to do is flip open a browser and type in People Work Connect, no spaces between them, no plus sign, .accenture.com, and you'll see most of what I'm talking about. The slide that I'm showing right now just brings down to a company level what you heard spoken about by everybody who preceded this. We all know that there are some pretty massive workforce shifts going on right now. This is a U.S. view, but it could as easily have been drawn for many other countries and geographies. And the data that we're looking right now was current as of April 8th, which was about the time that we began mobilizing to take action. So what we saw was that many of our clients were furloughing or laying off workers. At the same time, some of our other clients were hiring workers because of upticks in their own demand profiles for services that they either ordinarily offer, or products and services that they either ordinarily offer or quickly pivoted to begin to offer. And simultaneous to this going on, about 3 weeks ago, we convened a number of CHROs, about 38 of them, and that group was convened by the two people who are the sponsors of this project. Ellen Shook, for those of you who know her, is the global senior managing director and chief leadership and human resources officer for Accenture, a small company of 500,000 people plus globally. And Eva Sage Gavin is the senior managing director and talent and organization / human potential lead for consulting in all of Accenture. And the two of them convened a call of 38 CHROs. Our CEO, Julie Sweet, joined them. And over the course of the call, it became, there were people on both sides of this chart, both the up purple arrow side and the down gray arrow side. And at some point, somebody turned around and asked us, hey, Accenture, you guys are really good at building platforms quickly. Could you build a platform for us where we could sort of see who has who's on which side of this equation, the slide that I'm on, and who has jobs or either roles or people to trade at scale? And could you provide some level of visibility for us to look into it city by city, at least within the US, but eventually the world, to understand where the opportunities are, where it makes sense for, say, David Rodriguez, the Chief Human Resources Officer of Marriott International, to peer into something, decide that it makes sense to pick up the phone and call the CHRO of Walmart Donna Morris, in order to begin to talk about how some kind of a mass trade details to be worked out between the two of them could be brokered. And so we took that on. Our CEO made this her compassion project, and Ellen and Neva mobilized a group of people, and we had some design criteria for what we call a minimum lovable product. It had to be open to all, not just our clients. It had to be simple, emphasis on simple and scalable. We wanted progress over perfection. We did not want to let perfection be the enemy of progress. And we wanted to build it with an open architecture so we could evolve it and add layer over time. And it had to fit the purpose, and the purpose was to enable a B2B, not a B2C conversation. So it's not a job board. We didn't want to build a job board. We didn't want to, replicate the functionality of an applicant tracking system or a recruitment or placement service, or be an HCM. None of that. We just wanted to create a B2B exchange where CHROs could decide where it made sense to begin talking to each other around what set of positions in which cities. And so I'm just going to flash up a couple of views of the dashboard. This is a dashboard that shows where, this is conceptual. Now it's gone live already, so I could show you what it actually looks like. It has a lot more green dots on it than this one does, but I decided not to, because that would just be, it's really open for people who subscribe to the platform and coalition partners. And anybody who has either roles or people, at least 100 of them on either side, is invited to join. Again, it's, people workconnect.accenture.com. Here are a number of organizations. They're all in scope. Here's some of the participating organizations, and the founding coalition was Accenture, Lincoln Financial Group, ServiceNow, and Verizon. We asked for very minimal information. The only information that we really need are how many job roles there are, whether it's roles or whether it's people that the organization has. We ask for the city that they're in and the number of people, just the gross number of people that are in there, and a single point of contact, a contact person. So the data input is really minimal. My team designed a matching algorithm that sits at the heart of it, that connects, roles to people, and indicates at a very gross level of approximation how much preparation that job needed. We recognize that some of the jobs are not going to be exact matches, but we also recognize that reskilling can be extremely rapid. So if you think about a desk clerk from a hotel being made redundant or furloughed, what are the odds that you can very quickly reskill that person to work the floor of a Walmart's or a Sam's Club? The odds are very good that that's a match, and we would have put them both at the same level of preparation. We've defined 5 different levels of preparation. Higher order skill jobs are higher up on this hierarchy. lower skilled jobs are lower down. And we really anticipate and are seeing that most of the jobs that are being, offered and roles that are offered are at the lower end, which is pretty consistent with what we just heard in the labor market presentation by Gad. So that's about what I wanted to say about the Passion Project. I'll make one other comment as well. So we continue to do work on a regular consulting basis. And one of the trends that we're seeing is that organizations are trying to map out, and we're helping them model scenarios about what reopening looks like, what recovery looks like. So people have been furloughed. Some of the people who've been furloughed, companies plan to bring back. Now, there are some complexities that these organizations are seeing. The US, the UK, and other countries have offered people cash assistance during this time, particularly people who've lost their job. It's called unemployment assistance. It sometimes supplements unemployment insurance. And that creates complexity. So we were recently providing advisement to a client who has a global chain of retail establishments, food establishments, and they furloughed a good number of people. And they were curious about whether or not what the economic scenario would look like to continue to pay them a wage, even though they were not working, versus actually furloughing them and what that looked like. And at some point, we were able to do some modeling and turn around and told them, listen, you're maybe defining the problem in the wrong way. You may want to think about what it will take to attract people back to the workplace as you start to scale back up, because there are, because of the CARES legislation, there are incentives for people to continue to remain on unemployment, even if they're offered a job back. And the game then changes from not, how many people do we furlough to how do we manage to attract people back and maintain our workforce so that when green shoots in the economy come over time, we can scale. The other complexity was that different states in the US and different countries around the world are opening at different rates and at different times. So we were able to build a model for them that took a multi-speed recovery into account so that they could decompose their recovery into region-specific kinds of areas. And that, I think, is what many, many organizations are beginning to look at. And that's but one dimension of what the whole thing looks like. Obviously, I look at things because of what I do through an analytics lens, and analyses are the heart and soul of modeling, and just sort of reporting back to this group trends that are becoming obvious in the marketplace. So Stella, back to you.
Thank you so much. And I know we were planning for a 15-minute break, but obviously there is a lot of content, which is actually very informative and very helpful. So I saw a lot of questions. I would encourage every one of you to reach out and connect with our panelists via LinkedIn and continue the conversations. We'll also continue to monitor them. And if we need to reach out to anyone of you in particular, we will do so. So to summarize what we've heard, it is compassion that we need to bring to the workplace. It is a complex road ahead, and it's uncharted territory for most of us. And in the next panel, we will focus on how some of those who have been digital for quite some time and operating in distributed ways, what have they learned about this new reality and how we can shortcut some of our transformation to this new digital world. So with that, we'll take a 3-minute break and we'll be back at 12 Eastern.